What happens when you decide to build a passenger train combining locomotives so feeble they're dubbed screamers? Passenger cars so cramped and challenging to board that they're scrapped in less than 9 months. A cab car, a proud engine stripped of its horsepower and left with only electrical functions? You create GO Transit's worst passenger train. Let's get started. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't GO Transit's worst train. It's a project that came together for a few reasons. First, I wanted to try painting my own N-scale rolling stock. Second, I had some spare engines and shells lying around that I wanted to put to use. And finally, I wondered what kind of train you'd end up with if you had to scavenge for parts in a dystopian world. The result? This train. A set of Chicago and Northwestern Gallery cars pulled by a couple of F40PHs with an F7 at the rear. It might not be what you're used to, but it's got its own story. Let's dive into that story a bit. In 1978, GO Transit bought 6 F40PH locomotives to handle increased passenger demand. However, due to their high horsepower needs, these were ill-suited for GO Transit's longer bi-level cars during rush hour. Their noisy HEP generators led crew members to affectionately call them screamers, thunderliners, and thunder wagons. After just 10 years, they were sold to Amtrak. Now, before the F40s in 1975, GO Transit realized that its passenger cars couldn't accommodate enough people. Unable to lengthen the trains, GO explored the concept of taller cars. In 1976, GO borrowed gallery cars from the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad to test double-decker operations for 9 months. These borrowed cars proved to be uncomfortable and inefficient. GO Transit's earlier passenger consists relied on auxiliary power control units, APCUs, for supplying electrical power to passenger cars. GO acquired and converted F units from Ontario Northland and Milwaukee Road into APCUs by replacing their engines with 600 kilowatt AGP systems. The F7s, retaining their cab controls, were ideal for push-pull operations and commonly served as the trailing units in passenger trains from the 1970s all the way to the mid-1990s. So here are the 3 engines that have been rescued. Each of the units has been completely disassembled. Every part has been cleaned. They've been reassembled in their original configurations and lubricated properly. So these are as good as they're going to get, in my opinion. Each of the engines have been put back on the layout and they have been tested. There is a clear winner in terms of performance. All 3 of them run well. This one runs very, very well. It creeps at slow speeds well, and it runs quite smoothly and doesn't make a lot of noise. So that's the engine I want to continue to work on to try to bring it up an extra level. So despite everything that I've done to try to improve this little engine, it's the poorest runner of the group. So I have decided that I'm going to turn this into a dummy engine. So here are the 2 chassis for the dummy units I'm going to construct. One is from the F7 and the other is from the F40PH. So in order to make these free-running chassis, the first thing I did was I removed the motors and the drive mechanisms. The next thing I did was I removed all of the gears from inside the power truck so that the wheels should be free spinning and not connected to the center gear mechanism. It turns out this wasn't enough to make the chassis run freely, and I had to remove the electrical contact wipers from the side of the wheels. With those metal wipers removed from the inside of the wheels, the chassis roll much smoother now and work well as a dummy unit. The remaining power unit is for the F40PH. This was the unit that I tested and ran the best, the most silent, and operated really well at slow speed. So this unit has been completely disassembled, cleaned, lubricated, and reassembled. This engine originally came with a grain of wheat incandescent bulb. I replaced that with a pair of 12-volt LEDs. My original intention was that I was going to illuminate both the headlight as well as the number boards, but I was having challenges with this LED and the way that it actually shines through the frame in and of itself, so I decided to disconnect it but leave it in place. One last experimental change I made with these units was that they all came with standard Rapido couplers. And as a proof of concept, I printed new, we'll call them cosmetic, knuckle couplers. It's a small upgrade that I've made. It looks great and it works surprisingly well. So I had these grand plans that I was going to take some old locomotives and turn them into GO Transit color schemes. I stripped these and I primed them and I very carefully applied the paint, and it was absolute garbage. So they immediately are back into the bath of 99% rubbing alcohol. After about a good hour, the paint starts to bubble up, which allows me to brush it off and start all over again. So I had used decent airbrush paint for this, and I don't know if it was my technique or whatever was off, but the lines were blurry, it was too thinned, I don't know. And so I was reminded that you can also use crappy old craft paint if you thin it correctly on models. I did a test run on a pair of old shells and the paint turned out perfect. I'm redoing all of it, and I'm going to do it the cheap, inexpensive, and sort of crappy way to see if that works out better. So I am working on the last bit of masking for the last coat of paint that I should need to put onto these 3 locomotives. I started with the white coat, then I moved on to the green, then I did the yellow stripe, then I moved on to the black, and in that process I forgot that I need to do the top of the hoods black as well. I'm quite happy with how most of the hood paint came out. You can see there is a little bit of gap. I went in with a small paintbrush and just touched up the gaps. So now the next step is I need to clear coat these because this is a very matte finish. So I'm going to attempt another first, which is I'm going to be applying water slide decals to my engine bodies. I haven't done this in a very long time, and it is almost impossible to see how tiny these graphics are. So I'll need to cut them to size. I'll need to place them in some water, apply them to the locomotive, and then set them in place with some microsol. So I have completed the first round of weathering on the 3 locomotives. For this first round, the goal was to emphasize all the seams and the vents on the shell, as well as add a bit of a grimy touch to it. And something I've seen online quite a bit in the tabletop wargaming community is Citadel's Nuln Oil. And this is used as a wash for tabletop gamers to bring out details and so on and so forth. And it is an unbelievably good weathering agent. I took a fairly fine paintbrush and I applied it along all of the seams, such as the door frames and around the vents. And then I also flooded in any of the grates with it. And the way that it turned out is amazing. This looks oily and grimy. It's unbelievable how it transforms the locomotives. The next step is that I'm now going to do a little bit of airbrushing to add some exhaust soot, and then after that's on, I am going to add just a little bit of dust around the base of the locomotives. I added a very minor amount of weathering to the trucks. I gave them a coat of deep charcoal paint, and then I dry brushed on just a little bit of dust. It just brings out some of the details. I didn't bother to paint the wheels, as much of this isn't even visible. So there you have it, an implausible, but not totally impossible, custom painted GO train, resurrected from parts taken from the junk box and based on an unlikely combination of engines and passenger cars. I think this train is a perfect reflection of the layout I'm trying to design, and this project has been encouraging. This was my first time custom painting engines and rolling stock, and has given me the confidence to create additional, unusual train combinations, as well as the confidence to start weathering my fleet of trains. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.